The camera freezes on the moment America can't stop replaying. Jasmine Crockett leans forward, the studio lights catching the calm in her eyes. Her voice is soft but razor-sharp. "Mark," she says, "if truth is what you fight for every day, why does it only seem to exist when it agrees with you?" For a heartbeat, nothing moves. Mark Levin's jaw tightens. His hand hovers over his notepad, knuckles pale. The studio audience holds its breath. The host, mid-blink, stops. You can almost hear the pulse of the nation waiting for his answer. Silence stretches like a wire about to snap. Then, a flicker. Levin laughs, that forced kind of laugh that hides panic. But his eyes betray him. Behind the glare of certainty, something collapses. Across America, millions watch the clip in real time. Phones buzz. Screens light up. A tweet flies across the feed. She did not just say that. Another, Levin's face says it all. Within seconds, the hashtag #MyCrockett question trends above breaking news. Producers in the control room stare at each other. One whispers, "Did she just end his career?" Another mutters, "Keep rolling, don't cut away." The camera zooms tighter. Jasmine doesn't move. She doesn't smirk. She waits, patient as a verdict. Her silence becomes the loudest sound in the room. Levin shifts, searching for his footing. The confidence that once filled entire networks seems to drain out of him. He starts to speak, stops, swallows. That's not the point," he stammers, but the words feel small. Somewhere in the crowd, a single clap breaks the quiet, then another. It spreads. Not wild applause, but the sound of recognition. The kind that says, "We saw it." In living rooms, offices, subways, people replay the clip again and again. They lean in, mesmerized by the poise of a woman who didn't need volume to conquer noise. The host finally exhales, attempting a shaky smile, but the tension remains thick enough to taste. And as the clip loops endlessly across timelines and screens, one question echoes louder than ever. How did it come to this? Because before that moment, no one, not even Levin himself, saw it coming. It began as a primetime special, one of those polished political panels designed to generate more noise than insight. The title flashed across the lower third, Constitutional Ethics in a Divided America. Viewers expected sparks, not substance. For producers, it was a guaranteed ratings night. For Mark Levin, it was familiar territory, another arena where he could thunder, interrupt, and dominate. Levin walked into the studio the way a veteran prizefighter steps into the ring, chin high, grin rehearsed, sure of his power. He had done this hundreds of times. His followers adored the performance, his signature mix of fury and wit, the way he could reduce policy to slogans and morality to mockery. To them, he was the last man standing against what he called the moral rot of modern liberalism. Tonight he was ready to deliver another round. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, younger, quieter, unbothered by the showmanship around her. Her team had warned her, "He's going to shout. He's going to talk over you. Don't take the bait." But Jasmine didn't need reminding. She'd spent her career in courtrooms where tempers flared, where truth had to fight for its right to be heard. She knew what chaos sounded like, and how to slice through it with calm precision. As the cameras rolled, the contrast between them was electric. Levin's voice filled the space. Jasmine's stillness absorbed it. Every movement, every glance told a different story. He radiated certainty. She radiated control. The host, eager for conflict, set the tone. "Congresswoman Crockett, Mr. Levin. Tonight we're asking, has America lost its moral compass?" A simple question on the surface, but behind it lay everything that divided the country. Levin jumped in first, seizing the spotlight. "Lost its compass? No, we've had it stolen. By people who twist the Constitution for their own power." He jabbed the air with his pen, voice swelling. The audience nodded, half cheering. He was in his element. When it was Jasmine's turn, her tone was nearly whisper quiet. "The Constitution," she began, "was written to protect freedom, not to weaponize it." No theatrics, no sarcasm, just clarity. For a moment, the room stilled, not out of awe, but confusion. This wasn't the soundbite energy producers craved. It was something deeper, heavier. As the debate went on, the ideological battle lines hardened. Levin framed himself as the defender of American purity, law, order, tradition. Jasmine countered with the story of America's progress, justice, inclusion, truth. The tension wasn't just political, It was moral. Viewers across the country sensed it too. This wasn't just another argument on cable TV. It felt personal, like the nation's conscience was on trial. Inside the control room, the director whispered to his crew, "This is different. Don't cut, stay wide, let it breathe." They felt the undercurrent, the push and pull between noise and reason, volume and vision. Then came the moment when Levin began circling his opponent, figuratively speaking. He interrupted, scoffed, gestured grandly. "With all due respect, Congresswoman," he sneered, "you wouldn't know constitutional ethics if it stood up and introduced itself." The audience laughed nervously. Jasmine didn't flinch. She smiled, a small knowing smile that carried the weight of restraint. It wasn't submission. It was patience. Somewhere through the haze of lights and tension, a truth was forming. This wasn't going to end the way producers thought. The usual formula, outrage, interruption, commercial break, was about to implode. Because beneath the theatrics, something larger was at stake. Not just policy, but the soul of public discourse. Was America still a place where truth could speak softly and still be heard? Or had volume replaced virtue entirely? The answer was coming. But what Levin didn't know was that Jasmine had come prepared, not to argue, but to expose. Mark Levin's voice was once described as a thunderstorm in a suit. For years, that thunder had rolled across American airwaves, rattling dinner tables and car dashboards alike. On his radio show, he didn't just speak. He commanded. The cadence, the indignation, the relentless certainty, it was performance art disguised as political truth. His listeners called in not for conversation, but for confirmation. He gave them outrage neatly packaged in moral armor, the feeling that they were right and everyone else was wrong. His rise came during an age when anger became currency. Networks wanted sparks, not nuance. And Levin? He was wildfire. From the first moment his gravel-edged voice hit national radio, it was clear this wasn't a man who debated. He dominated. Clips from his early years still circulate, him shouting down professors, mocking liberal callers, and slamming his desk mid-sentence. He didn't just disagree with opponents, he humiliated them. His fans loved it. "Tell it like it is, Mark," they'd shout on forums, turning every outburst into proof of authenticity. For them, Levin wasn't a pundit. He was a warrior, the last defender of a fading America. But to his critics, that fire felt different. Beneath the patriotic vocabulary and legal bravado, they saw something else. A man addicted to his own voice, mistaking dominance for truth. They noticed the pattern. Every discussion became a sermon, every counterpoint an attack. Levin had built a kingdom where doubt was treason. Behind the microphone, he carried himself with the weight of absolute conviction. When he leaned into the mic, the tone deepened. The words hit like hammer blows. "These leftists hate the Constitution. They despise your freedom." The crowd would roar, online threads lighting up in unity and anger. In those moments, he was untouchable, a titan powered by applause. But even titans have cracks. Off-air colleagues whispered that he was exhausted, that he'd begun to believe his own myth. He demanded precision from others, but tolerated none of it himself. One producer recalled, he didn't want facts, he wanted fire. If you brought him nuance, he'd tell you to save it for the next liberal panel. The truth was, Levin had mastered control. Control of the mic, control of the narrative, control of his image. Every pause, every explosion of temper, every insult was calibrated, or so he believed. The danger was that after so many years of wielding outrage as a weapon, he no longer knew where the performance ended and the person began. There was an odd duality to him. To millions, he was the voice of reason. To millions more, the sound of division. And yet both sides agreed on one thing. He was certain, unshakably, immovably certain, about everything. That certainty became his armor and his prison. Because when you are always right, the world stops being a conversation. It becomes a courtroom where you are judge, jury, and executioner. On screen, the contrast was cinematic. One moment he was smirking at a guest's trembling voice. The next he was pounding the desk, veins rising in his temple. "Answer the question," he'd bark, even as he refused to let them speak. Viewers didn't just watch him. They anticipated his explosion the way one anticipates lightning. It wasn't news. It was theater. Yet behind that thunderous presence was a quieter truth, fear. The fear of losing control. The fear of silence. The fear that if he ever stopped shouting, someone else's truth might sound clearer than his own. In interviews, when asked if he ever regretted being too harsh, Levin would scoff. "You can't coddle lies," he'd say, but his eyes told a different story. The brief flicker of weariness, the kind that comes from carrying the weight of being right all the time. As the years went on, his outbursts grew louder, his patience thinner. What once felt like conviction began to look like desperation. The world was changing faster than his rhetoric could keep up. The audiences that once worshipped him were aging, splintering. A new generation didn't want shouting. They wanted sense, and perhaps deep down Levin knew that. But the only way he knew how to fight fading relevance was to shout louder. That's what made the debate with Jasmine Crockett different. To him, it wasn't just another TV slot. It was a test of dominance, a reaffirmation that he still commanded fear, that his word was final. But on that night, facing a woman who refused to shout back, Levin's greatest weapon turned against him. His certainty, the very thing that had built his empire, became his undoing. And on that night, that very certainty became the rope that unraveled his own argument. Before the bright lights of the debate stage, before millions watched her silence, a man who made a career out of loudness, Jasmine Crockett was just a girl from Dallas who refused to stay quiet in a world that constantly told her to. She didn't grow up surrounded by privilege or comfort. Her power didn't come from connections. It came from conviction. Every inch of her journey was carved through resistance, through grit, through the stubborn belief that truth mattered, even when it didn't seem to pay. In the courtrooms of Texas, Jasmine learned that power doesn't always look like what people imagine. Sometimes it isn't the one shouting the loudest. Sometimes it's the one who refuses to be moved. Early in her law career, she represented clients who couldn't afford much more than hope. Single mothers facing eviction, young men railroaded by the system, and families fighting to keep what little they had. The rooms were rarely kind. The judges were impatient, the opposing counsel dismissive, and the system tilted like a rigged scale. But Jasmine stayed. Every setback sharpened her. Every eye roll from an older attorney became another layer of armor. She learned to let the noise pass through her, to breathe, to pause, to respond with clarity rather than fire. It was in those moments that she discovered her secret weapon, composure. When you've stood in front of a courtroom where no one expects you to win, and you win anyway, it changes something inside you. It redefines what fear feels like. It teaches you to control the rhythm of a room, to let silence do the talking. That silence would later become her signature. In Congress, Jasmine carried that same fire, but it wasn't reckless. It was disciplined, honed. She wasn't there to perform. She was there to represent those who'd never had a microphone. When debates turned hostile, she didn't shrink. When her voice was dismissed, she made it sharper. But her calm wasn't passive. It was deliberate, almost surgical. Every word, every gesture, every pause was part of a larger rhythm she had mastered long ago. Her colleagues sometimes mistook her stillness for restraint. It wasn't. It was calculation, a kind born from years of surviving spaces that were not built for her. There's a kind of loneliness that comes with that strength. The quiet isolation of knowing you must always be both composed and unbreakable. Behind the poised expression and steady tone, there were nights when she sat alone replaying exchanges in her head. Times when she wondered if the toll of holding herself together, for cameras, for causes, for her community, was too heavy. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered the faces of those she'd defended. The young woman in handcuffs whispering, "Thank you." The mother who cried when the verdict came back in her favor. The students who said they saw themselves in her. Those moments anchored her. They became the foundation of her resilience, not ego, not ambition, but purpose. That's what separated her from men like Mark Levin. For him, power was about domination. For Jasmine, it was about dignity. And that difference, an invisible but unmistakable, would shape everything that happened on debate night. When the cameras turned on, the world saw two forces, one loud, one still. One frantic, one precise. The contrast was cinematic, almost poetic. Mark Levin, the seasoned provocateur, tried to summon chaos. But Jasmine understood something deeper, that chaos feeds on reaction, and the only way to defeat it is to starve it. In the hours before the debate, she prepared not for arguments but for energy. She studied his patterns, how he talked over people, how he used mockery as a shield, how his certainty left no room for reflection. She didn't need to match his aggression. She just needed to let him unravel himself. And when she finally walked onto that stage, calm, poised, almost serene, she wasn't just stepping into a debate. She was stepping into a moment that her entire life had prepared her for. Every courtroom battle had taught her patience. Every dismissal had taught her grace. Every insult had taught her control. So when Mark Levin raised his voice that night, she didn't flinch. She leaned in. And in that simple act, that quiet, deliberate choice, the balance of power shifted. Because true strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't roar or demand to be seen. It waits. It watches. And then, at the exact right moment, it speaks. That was Jasmine Crockett, the woman who turned silence into a strategy, composure into a weapon, and calm into the ultimate act of defiance. She wasn't just debating a man that night. She was confronting a culture that mistook volume for truth. And the world was about to see what happens when patience finally meets arrogance, live under the bright studio lights. The studio lights burned hotter than usual that night, the kind of heat that made tempers rise before the words even started. The cameras were already rolling, the audience hushed but buzzing with that peculiar electricity that only comes before a clash everyone secretly hopes will explode. Mark Levin sat forward, eyes sharp behind his glasses, his notes spread like a battlefield before him. Jasmine Crockett, across from him, sat with her hands calmly folded, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady. She wasn't here to fight noise with noise. The moderator barely finished the introduction when Levin pounced. "Let's be honest here," he snapped, cutting through the first question before Jasmine could even open her mouth. "You and your party have made a living dividing this country, pretending to be victims of a system that you've already taken over. Isn't that the real hypocrisy?" There was a sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the audience. Jasmine didn't move. Her face was unreadable, neither defensive nor dismissive, just present. When she finally spoke, her tone was low and measured. "Mark, what divides this country isn't who speaks up. It's who refuses to listen," the audience murmured. Levin smirked. He leaned forward as if proximity might overpower composure. "Oh, please," he barked, waving a hand. "Spare us the sermon. You've built your career crying foul at every turn. Don't act like you're some moral savior of the Republic." Jasmine tilted her head slightly, the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of her lips. Not amusement, not mockery, just recognition. She'd seen this energy before in courtrooms, in panels, in every room where a man mistook volume for victory. "Mark," she said quietly, "I don't save republics. I defend people." Levin interrupted before she could continue. "Oh, come on. That's such a cliché. You defend criminals. You defend failed policies. You defend chaos." Now the tension in the studio had texture, heavy, visible. Even the hosts exchanged uneasy glances. The moderator tried to interject, but Levin's voice barreled through the air like a storm front. "And let's talk about your tone," he continued, jabbing a finger. "You love playing calm, but that's arrogance disguised as civility. You think silence makes you smarter? It just means you have nothing of substance to say." The audience gasped. For a moment it seemed like the insult would land, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She took a slow breath, her fingers barely moving against the desk, grounding herself. Then in that stillness she answered, softly, but with precision sharp enough to cut through his entire performance. "Silence," she said. "Here's what people use when shouting stops working." The words hung in the air. Levin blinked, momentarily thrown off rhythm. The audience murmured again, this time louder. A few people even clapped before the moderator gestured for quiet. Levin's face flushed, a shade between anger and disbelief. He leaned back in his chair, chuckling bitterly, but the laugh was hollow, the kind that hides a bruise forming underneath. He regrouped, switching tactics. "You know what's funny?" he sneered. "You talk about defending people, but you've spent more time defending policies that hurt the very communities you claim to represent. So tell us, Congresswoman, when did you decide that ideology was more important than results?" The question was meant to corner her, to draw her into a trap where emotion would crack her composure. But Jasmine didn't take the bait. She adjusted her mic slightly, looked straight at him and said, "When people stop being treated like results." Her tone was almost whisper soft, but it landed with weight. Even Levin blinked, momentarily silenced by how controlled she was. The debate spiraled. He got louder. She got quieter. He pounded the desk. She folded her hands. Every time he interrupted, she paused, not to yield, but to remind him that she would speak on her time, not his. It wasn't just a political debate anymore. It had become psychological warfare. The more unshakable she became, the more desperate he grew to break her rhythm. His voice cracked with frustration. His hands moved faster. The producers in the control room whispered through headsets. The tension was gold for television, but they could feel the imbalance too. At one point, Levin slammed his notes down. "Answer the question," he roared. Jasmine didn't even blink. She looked at him, not as an opponent, but almost as if she pitied him. Her calm became unnerving, almost haunting, and that's when the audience began to shift, subtly, instinctively. The murmurs changed from anticipation to discomfort. It was no longer a fair fight. It was a man unraveling on live television, while a woman simply refused to lose her peace. The moderator tried to redirect, but Levin was already too far gone, cornered by his own fury. He was shouting now and about politics, integrity, the decline of discourse, and Jasmine. She just waited. Then, as his voice finally cracked into silence, she leaned forward slightly, eyes steady, and smiled, at not wide, not mocking, just enough to signal that something was coming. The studio fell into that strange kind of silence that only happens when something irreversible is about to occur. The lights hummed. The cameras rolled closer. Even the audience seemed to sense it. The shift, the electricity, the quiet before impact. Mark Levin was still catching his breath, his last tirade dissolving into thin air. His voice had been the loudest in the room all night, but now it trembled at the edges. He leaned back in his chair, chest rising and falling, that practiced smirk trying to mask fatigue. And then Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. Her movement was subtle, but the entire atmosphere bent toward her. The lights seemed to follow. Her hands rested gently on the table, her voice low, not for drama, but for precision. "Mark," she said, her tone steady as glass, "if everything you say is about protecting truth, then why do your facts keep changing depending on who's in power?" The words hit like a slow-motion thunderclap. Levin froze, his lips parted, just enough for a sound that never came. His eyes darted to the moderator, to his notes, then back to her. For the first time all night, he didn't know where to look. The studio was dead silent. You could hear a chair creak somewhere in the back row. The air conditioning hummed faintly. A camera operator, realizing what had just happened, instinctively zoomed in, tighter on Levin's face, capturing every flicker of disbelief. Levin blinked, his jaw twitching, as though the right words were hiding just out of reach. "That's—" he began, then stopped. He chuckled under his breath, a dry, defensive laugh that fooled no one. "Well," he finally managed, "that's a cute question. A little rehearsed, maybe. But—" he stumbled. The sentence hung incomplete. The chuckle died. Jasmine didn't move, didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply watched him, patient, unyielding, her silence turning the air heavy enough to carry meaning all by itself. The moderator looked from one to the other, unsure whether to intervene or let it breathe. The producers, watching from behind the glass, exchanged wide-eyed stares. One whispered, "We're witnessing it live." Another muttered, "Don't cut. Whatever you do, don't cut." Across America, screens glowed in living rooms and cafes, the clip already being clipped, shared, replayed in real time. On Twitter, the hashtag #Crockett question began climbing. Seconds later, Levin freeze. Tweets appeared like lightning across the feed. "She's ending him with grace." Silence just became her superpower. Levin's face says everything. This is what accountability looks like. Back on stage, Levin tried again. His voice, usually booming and confident, cracked. "What I meant, what I've always meant, is that truth doesn't change. But people twist it." Jasmine tilted her head slightly. Her reply was calm, surgical. Yes, they do. Especially the ones who shout the loudest about protecting it. The crowd's reaction was instant, a low collective gasp, then ripples of applause. Even those who didn't know what side they were on could feel the gravity. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was exposure. Levin's composure faltered. He reached for his water, hands slightly shaking. He laughed again, softer this time, like someone trying to find shelter inside denial. Well, he muttered, forcing a grin, you've clearly practiced that line. But Jasmine's expression didn't change. She wasn't performing. She was witnessing. Her silence between words carried more weight than any monologue could. Then she spoke again, slower now, each syllable deliberate. Mark, I've learned that people who truly believe in truth don't need to raise their voices. They just need to stand still and let it speak for itself. Her words landed like an anchor. No rush, no triumph, just quiet certainty. Levin opened his mouth again, but this time nothing came out. He looked away. The camera followed the motion, a slow cinematic pan that caught every ounce of discomfort washing across his face. The moderator cleared his throat softly, trying to steer the conversation elsewhere. But the moment had already transcended the debate. It wasn't about policy anymore. It was about truth itself hanging there between them, unshakable, undeniable. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled to capture every angle. Clip it, one said. Clip it now. Another voice cut in. That's the moment. Right there. That's history. And online history was already happening. TikTok edits, reaction videos, memes with Levin's frozen face captioned, "When you realize your argument," by midnight. The clip had already traveled further than anyone in that studio could have imagined. It started as a 30-second upload, a simple replay of Jasmine Crockett leaning forward, her voice calm, her question cutting through the air like a scalpel. But within an hour it had become something else entirely. Millions watched, millions more shared. The moment replayed on every platform, every angle, every tone, the silence after her question looping over and over, like America couldn't get enough of watching certainty collapse in real time. On X, the comments poured in like a flood. She didn't raise her voice once. That's real power. Crockett just gave a masterclass in restraint. This is what happens when intelligence meets arrogance. And the one that trended above all, Levin's face says everything. By dawn, every Crockett question had become a movement. TikTok creators stitched the clip with music, analysis, slow-motion breakdowns. Reaction videos flooded YouTube. Political podcasts opened their episodes with it. One conservative host sighed on air, "Look, I may not agree with her politics, but that was brutal." The news cycle couldn't ignore it either. CNN called it the question heard across America. MSNBC labeled it the moment truth spoke back. Even Fox, hesitant at first, ran a short segment, clipped, selective, but unavoidable. The footage was everywhere. And in living rooms, classrooms, and offices, people whispered the same thing. Did you see her face? That calm, that question? The comment sections told a bigger story, a national reckoning unfolding in real time. Progressives saw validation, a reflection of their quiet frustrations. Immigrants and working-class viewers saw a woman who had climbed her way through doubt and noise, finally standing toe-to-toe with one of the loudest voices in American media, and winning not with anger, but with poise. Even those who didn't follow politics felt it. It wasn't just a debate clip. It was a mirror. A moment where composure defeated chaos, where intellect disarmed intimidation. Behind the scenes, the producers were stunned. In the control room, they replayed the footage frame by frame. The question, the silence, Levin's faltering smile. One of them leaned back and whispered, "We just captured history." Another, eyes still fixed on the screen, said quietly, "She didn't just win. She changed something." That sense of change rippled outward. The next morning, journalists scrambled to book Jasmine for interviews. Editorials poured in. The power of poise, how Jasmine Crockett redefined political courage, why calm is the new resistance. Meanwhile, Levin's camp scrambled. His team issued a statement about selective editing, claiming the exchange was taken out of context, but the internet had already decided otherwise. Context didn't matter, because the truth was visible, undeniable, immortalized in her steady gaze and his stunned silence. Even comedians joined the chorus. Late-night hosts played the clip with dramatic music, pausing mid-laugh to say, "So you can't script that kind of pause." Audience roars followed, but behind the laughter, there was something deeper: recognition. In just 24 hours, what began as another political debate had turned into a cultural landmark. It wasn't about party lines anymore. It was about tone, truth, and timing, how one moment could flip the dynamic of power, exposing not just a man's weakness, but an entire system's overconfidence. Online, artists painted digital portraits of Jasmine mid-question, the raised eyebrow, the quiet strength. Activists used her words in captions, posters, fundraisers. College students quoted her in speeches. Even on Capitol Hill, whispers began, "She's the real deal." The debate wasn't just remembered, it was studied. People slowed it down, analyzed micro-expressions, dissected the art of her restraint. What they found wasn't luck or chance, and it was mastery. Days after the debate, the storm began to quiet, but something lingered. News cycles moved on, hashtags faded, and yet Jasmine Crockett's question refused to disappear. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the way she asked them, calm, unshaken, as if she already knew the answer. When she finally sat down for an interview that week, the host asked her the question half the country had been wondering. Did you plan it? That moment, Jasmine smiled softly. "I wasn't trying to win an argument," she said. "I was trying to remind people that truth doesn't need volume. It needs courage." Her answer landed with the same quiet strength that had silenced a studio. She wasn't gloating, and she wasn't reliving the clash. She was speaking about something bigger. The idea that truth, when carried with grace, doesn't have to shout to be heard. Clips from the interview spread just as quickly as the debate itself. Commentators replayed her words over slow piano music. Podcasts broke it down frame by frame. But underneath all the analysis, what people really felt was simple: the return of dignity in a space that had forgotten what it looked like. Because what Jasmine had done that night wasn't just political. It was human. In a world addicted to outrage, she chose composure. In a setting built for dominance, she chose discipline. And in front of millions of viewers trained to expect noise, she made silence her power. One columnist wrote, "Crockett reminded us that the loudest person in the room isn't always the one who's right. Sometimes, it's the one who refuses to play the game." Even those who disagreed with her politically couldn't deny what they'd seen. The rare sight of certainty meeting grace, and crumbling beneath it. In classrooms, her clip began appearing in media studies lectures about tone and persuasion. In offices, co-workers replayed it during breaks, each time nodding at her poise. For many, it became a reminder of something deeply American, that power is not proven by shouting down others, but by standing firm in quiet conviction. Because what Jasmine demonstrated wasn't just intelligence, it was moral clarity, the kind that doesn't come from ambition, but from alignment with something real. As she told one journalist later, "When you've spent your life fighting for people who have no voice, you learn to make yours count. Not with noise, but with purpose." Her words struck a chord across generations. Young activists quoted her on social media. Teachers pinned her quote to classroom boards. Even late-night comedians, usually drawn to mockery, replayed the moment not for laughs, but for respect. Some called it a takedown. Others called it a turning point. But to Jasmine, it was neither. It was a mirror, held up to a culture that had mistaken aggression for truth. And so it all comes back to that single question, the one he couldn't answer. Not because he didn't have time, not because the cameras cut away, but because deep down, he knew that no amount of volume could drown out a truth that steady. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett reminded the world of something we too easily forget: that restraint isn't weakness. It's precision. That composure isn't passivity, it's control. And that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply asks the right question and waits. Her calm became the counterpoint to his chaos. Her silence, the sound of conviction. And the lesson: that truth doesn't need permission to be powerful. It only needs someone brave enough to stand behind it. The cameras eventually turned off. The studio emptied. The lights dimmed. But the echo of her question, "Why do your facts keep changing depending on who's in power?" still lingers across timelines, classrooms, and dinner tables. It's no longer just about her or him. It's about all of us. Because every time someone uses calm to confront noise, truth to confront spin, dignity to confront ego, that moment lives again. So now, the question turns to you. If you were in her seat, what would you have asked? Moments like this remind us that real power isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who stands the tallest when the noise gets unbearable. If you believe dignity deserves a louder voice, subscribe, share, and stand with us. Because the next time truth walks into the room, it deserves a crowd strong enough to listen.